Hi everyone, welcome to this webinar. Troll here. My name is Epi. I'm the founder and CEO of CrowdSourcing Week. We're glad to do this webinar together with Tipalti and Shareable. One of the key focus about this webinar, we'll be talking about the crowdsourcing marketplaces and payouts. And the future of work is increasing and rely on the global and demand freelance providers. As a growth of oriented business, this is about the are we ready to address its major impact on operations, compliance and partners relations. One of the key points here that we're going to learn here is that one, I'll be walking you through around the 14 parts of crowd economy marketplaces and where we are in terms of the trends and challenges. But then also we're going to also have other key points here in terms of how to build loyalty within a transient distracted freelance marketplace. Fixable compliance and efficiency gaps in most gig-based processes, and the ways to enhance cash flow to accommodate a group that expects to be paid immediately. So it's all about the payments and what this really represents. So welcome everyone, and this is our first webinar that we're kicking off together. So thanks for joining us. Before I jump into the presentation, so it's going to be a dual presentation between me and Rob. I'll just have a quick introduction about Rob Israq. He's a CMO for Tipalti, which brings over 15 years of experience to the company and modern approach to running a marketing with a heavy orientation around data analytics, technology, and content marketing. Prior to Tipalti, Rob served as VP Global Marketing Programs at NetSuite, where he led global branding, international marketing, and demand generation, helping guide the company through 10x growth in terms of revenues from a private company through IPO to cloud market leader. Our next also a guest is Neal Gorenflo, a great friend of CrowdSourcing Week, and is the co-founder of Shareable, an award-winning nonprofit that publishes the world's leading online magazine about sharing and sharing cities network. He's a social entrepreneur, speaker, and author focused on the sharing economy, sharing cities, and the future of work. He is also the co-editor of the sharing theme books, Share or Die, and Policies for Shareable Cities. His latest book was published late last year, is Sharing Cities, Activating the Urban Commons. So without taking more of the time, we're just going diving into my presentation first, and then we go into Rob's presentation, and later on we'll have some questions and answers, and we'll open up some of the questions. So feel free to ask questions on the chat here. And so yeah, let's start. Great. So here's a little bit about myself. I founded CrowdSourcing Week in 2012. Prior to that, I used to run an advertising agency, boutique advertising agency in New York. I also was a classical music cellist for many years. And also, I used to run a bar in New York, and so if anyone wants to know how to really run a bar or why you should not run a bar, please let me know after this call. So I want to walk you through here first in terms of the what has happened for the past 25 years in terms of the World Wide Web, and how the Internet of Information is turning into the Internet of value. And so we've seen the e-commerce side in terms of the Amazon and eBay, where there was this introduction of this reputation currency between peer-to-peer commerce. started seeing a Wikipedia in terms of like how these volunteers, they are contributing their time, skills, and also the money. But the interesting fact that really happened during the recession in 2007 to 2009 was that we have these disruptors, this first wave of this crowd economy, sharing economy coming. And so this was the beginning of this journey that we're going to talk about it. So this is where we have the birth of the Kickstarters and Indiegos and Airbnbs. And today, what we are going to really cover, most of it, is going to talk about also the what is happening today in terms of the where is the second wave of the crowd economy and the Internet of Value. But before I walk you through this, first, let me share this diagram. So we created this diagram about 3 years ago now, and when we introduced this diagram, it was more to really give people a clear picture where this space is in terms of the platforms. And so the idea was to really bring forward this clear picture in terms of the parts of this crowd economy. And one of the areas that we really wanted to make sure that people understand is that like what crowdsourcing really means for individuals, as anyone can join this, but also what crowdsourcing means for organizations at large. So to better kind of bring this in a clear picture, we also thought it would be nice to really bring some of these companies so you can know more or less where each of these segments fit. And a lot of times when I was talking about crowdsourcing, people sometimes they misunderstand about crowdfunding, and so this kind of like clarifies better like where the crowdfunding fits in this crowdsourcing space. So one of these things that we look in terms of the crowdsourcing world and the shared economy, we look at as people get involved, there's this build up in terms of reputations, and so we're no longer talking about these reputations that are existent in social media, but we're talking about more about the reputations that now that are starting to build up in platforms of the social productivity platforms. And so these type of reputations are very important because now these are built on actions, and so they're not like what the Internet of Information was, but this isn't talking about what really the Internet of Value brings in terms of the people's passions, talents, skills, and intelligent resources being clearly showed in a way in terms of the reputation. And this also brings us a better understanding in terms of like where the next phase can go in terms of like what happens with this reputation, how we can really move along. And I'm going to cover a little bit on the decentralization phase of this presentation. But when it comes to the platforms itself, we created this format around 5 P's of the crowd economy, and the reason why is because we look at what really makes people participate, and so this purpose that needs to be designed for the people to participate, it's not just the platform that's going to cut it. So that's why we created this 5 P's where it stands for the people, purpose, participation, platform, and finally getting the productivity. So the importance of really making sure that the platform itself serves the right purpose for the people is key element in these marketplaces that we're going to cover today. And this also leads us to the mindset as well. This mindset where we're talking about the mindset of the download versus the mindset of the upload. And clearly you can see here from a past, present, and future, we see that there is a big world out there that are really immersing themselves in this journey of the future. And I think this is where things start to really happen in a massive scale, where now people can be part of these multiple platforms. And Rob is going to cover some of the issues there are in terms of the people being part of these platforms and how they're able to really be able to be in many of the same platforms in 2 or 3 different platforms. I think one of the main areas that we wanted to bring this forward in terms of like what the crowdsourcing means for organizations, large organizations, is that lots of organizations today, they been focused a lot around the talent development and not so much focused in terms of the talent utilization. And I think the opportunity when we talk about crowdsourcing does not really exist on the external side, but also brings us on the internal side of the organization. So how can individuals in the companies, how the employees in the companies can be utilized in across functions? And I think the opportunity of this, we call like a hyperloop of innovation. It brings the opportunity for organizations to really utilize all these skills and the passions and talents that they have internally. So we're not just talking about the opportunities that these people are directly involved, but also the opportunities that's probably like indirectly involved. And I've been a big fan thinking in terms of like what does this mean in terms of a cognitive surplus that exists out there among people outside the organization, but also inside the organization. One great example that I like to bring in here is that what I've been talking about this, what really means in terms of like connecting passions and talents with the right platforms. And so here's a lady, Maya, forgot her last name, but she's a MIT News Labs deputy editor, and that's her day job. But for her, her passion, and she's been doing this for years. She's been collecting all these great stories about these women of NASA. So one day, Maya, she found a platform called Lego Ideas, which is a crowdsourcing platform run by Lego Innovation Lab. And so the opportunity here was that when she discovered this platform, she was able to really bring this story to a whole new light. And so she created a prototype on the Lego Ideas, and after she collected over 10,000 reviews, Lego Ideas Innovation Lab brought her prototype into the Innovation Lab, and after reviewing it, they decided to make a toy. So this was clearly that a winner for Lego Ideas, but also for Maya, not just from a commercial side, but also in terms of the story itself. Think about like how many great stories are out there, but they're just existing in a book, so they're existing in the papers, but they're not brought in such a great way like this. So the opportunity that I always see in terms of what really this crowdsourcing marketplaces can bring us to much connected to the past, present, and to the future. And so when I talk about decentralization, and this is one of the themes of the Crowdsourcing Week for this year, is that we're seeing there's a really big shift here. And the big shift is happening due to the fact that we're starting to see the reinvention of the internet. So when I look at what we have passed and what we are going forward, I see that there is real opportunity that anyone can be part of it, and without really being tied into any centralized organization. But before we talk about this and talk about, what this blockchain world brings us forward, we must understand the real basis of this. And so I'd like to go back to the real foundation of why are we here now and what's happened for thousands of years. So if you look for thousands and thousands of years, a trade was a family affair. Only the kings and queens were able to really do trades with other kingdoms. And so what happened back in those days, there was only this single entry accounting. And so these kings and queens, they had to have someone trusted, like brother, sister, or cousin, or whoever that is trusted next to them to really make sure that they are entering all this data in terms of like the wealth and everything. So this wealth creation was really concentrated among all these big prominent families. So this was going on for thousands of years. Now, what happened, something really interesting during the 15th century, we had the introduction of a double entry accounting. And so there's a gentleman, Luca Pacioli, was an Italian mathematician who published the influential book Summa. He brought this idea in terms of double entry accounting because it saw the need of what's happening in terms of a trade that you have nations coming through Venice and trading. And so this was really the beginning of this double entry accounting. And so thank God for double entry accounting, because if we didn't have double entry accounting, today we will not have this innovation that we are experiencing. We won't have the bridges, we won't have the tunnels, we won't have the airplanes, and so forth. So this really helped the society, brought us to where we are today. Now, what's really happening really interesting in terms of the decentralization, and we all must understand the basics of it, is that now what we're doing, we are entering the world of the triple entry accounting, okay? So if we go back here, during double entry accounting, we had a time and a stamp doing this double entry accounting. But what we're having here is like we're having a time, stamp, and a record. And this is what really makes us look into the future, that now the middlemen, these centralized entities, are going away because they're becoming obsolete. And so the opportunity that we're going to see here is not just like really seeing these records, seeing like where a specific product came from, the date, and exactly where it was shipped, but we're also seeing the level of transparency getting to the highest level ever. Now, I always say that the decentralization is not the perfect system, but it allows organization, individuals to really scale up and bring this innovation to accelerated pace. And this is the real exciting opportunity that we're seeing doing this triple entry accounting that we already have just entered. And this is the most exciting journey that I see it in the future of the marketplaces in the World Wide Web. Now, who are those enablers in terms of decentralization? We're looking at the organization like Ethereum and Cardano and Neo and Qtum, but these are pretty much like what WordPress is for the content management system. These are the platforms for the decentralized applications. And so we look at here like where Web 2.0 applications are, and you can recognize most of them. But then on to your right, on a Web 3.0 decentralized application, we're seeing a whole new, fairly new organization that are really taking this space really aggressively. So the opportunity that I see here is like now there is pretty much almost every single decentralized app existent in the marketplace, not that are fully functional, but are just the beginning of what this Internet of Value will look like in the future. So for us, like when we look at this, what the decentralization means, we also look at like how crowdsourcing is part of this. And we talked a lot about the AI and we talked about all these blockchain, but crowdsourcing, it is the main focus because we're talking about people, and people are the ones who are really, this technology is being created for the people and not the other way around. So one of the key focus that we focus in is like how crowdsourcing is changing businesses, how crowdsourcing is changing individuals, and we're talking about healthcare and labor. And the other two is how crowdsourcing is changing governments, and the last one is how crowdsourcing is changing innovation in its science and its space frontiers. So this will be one of the four themes that we'll be covering at our global conference in DC in October. So now I'll stop here and move to Rob and go ahead with his presentation. But I just wanted to really open Rob's presentation with this slide, and this was a very interesting wheel that you guys have created from marketplaces as an example, and really it struck me that the over 80% of people who were part of this were non-U.S. residents, but most of these platforms are from U.S. So I'd like to really hand over this to Rob and look forward to the presentation.
Thanks, Epi. Great presentation. I always love your content. And so Epi talked about kind of the future of crowdsourcing and the share economy and where it's headed. And now I'm going to kind of take it down a level, and we're going to talk about a study we recently did where it gets the nuts and bolts of the gig economy and the marketplaces today, and how are they operating effectively, what are obstacles to operations, because the folks on the phone, some of you are running a crowdsourcing or an online marketplace business currently, and so what are some of the challenges you're running into right now? So in line with the topic, we partnered with both Neal from Shareable as well as Epi from Crowdsourcing Week about satisfaction with the payment experience. Obviously, in the two-sided economy world, you have to not only bring demand, but the real challenge is you have to also build that supply chain out of freelancers, of talent, of drivers, and et cetera. And when you're building that two-sided marketplace, there's always a question of where do you start, on the supply chain or on the demand side. But ultimately, your product is your talent and your drivers and your freelancers, and you need to make sure you provide them with an outstanding experience. So we ran the study in partnership with Crowdsourcing Week and Shareable, and so I'll go through some of those findings today. So I think the key observation that jumped out is the biggest threat to many marketplaces in today's scenario is freelancers have options. There's a lot of marketplaces out there. The gig economy has taken hold, and they're looking at numerous different marketplaces, and you'll see through the data that they're actually hedging their bets and working with numerous marketplaces and crowdsourcing companies at once. And they're going to go where they think the better experience is, the marketplace who treats them better, who they feel gives them better business, and certainly just an overall better experience. So really, as you're building out your two-sided marketplace, it's not good enough just to attract the freelancers, but how do you get them to engage? How do you get them to retain with you but give you more share of wallet and shine? And so the study today, you'll see numerous data points that talk to that. The first kind of big piece is talking about that. The freelancers tend to be hedging their bets nowadays. They like the freelance lifestyle, but they're hedging their bets from an economic perspective and diversifying which marketplace they work with. And so you can see that about 64% of freelancers are using at least two different marketplaces at once. Actually, almost 20% are using four or more, which is amazing. There's still a good chunk, 37.5, who are only using one marketplace, but the trend seems to be moving in the direction of having multiple marketplaces at once. And so you really have to be aware of that and making sure that you're doing everything you can to not only retain the freelancers, that's almost not good enough today, but then how do you also increase your share of wallet with them, share of mind, and satisfaction with them. Some interesting factoids related to that that came out of the study in terms of the payment experience and how important it is in that whole experience you have with your freelancers. 96% said the payment experience matters to them. 49% referred to their freelancer work as their primary source of income, so it's almost the majority of their income, and obviously that's pretty important to them from that perspective. Certainly 39% want to work with a marketplace they consider reliable. Overall, not just payments, but in that overall experience, but reliability is an important perception you want to build with your freelancers. And certainly hassle-free payments, 29%. The question with the 29% is why do the other ones not want hassle-free payments? But that's a question for another day.
Yeah.
I thought this one was probably the finding that was most compelling. 74% of freelancers would already have dropped a marketplace because of a payment issue. It's a huge number. And so if you think about your experience with your freelancers, from onboarding them and getting them going, giving them training, the interaction with your app or your product, all the way through the end of the process, getting a customer and satisfying that customer. The payment experience is arguably, based on some of this data, the most important touch point you have with them. And so you really have to focus on that, not just from getting them paid on time or accurately, but the whole experience around it. Is it a white labeled experience? Are you giving them choice of payment methods? Are you able to pay freelancers easily around the world? So something to think about there. Related to that satisfaction from freelancers with their marketplace. So while 41% are satisfied, the rest feel that there is improvement to be made. It's about 59% in total, which is the majority for sure. 29% have had experiences, unfortunately, of not being paid for their services. Another 28% have actually experienced late payments. So again, you add those two together, and the majority have had a negative payment experience throughout their history. Interesting to point out that this survey included both U.S. and non-U.S. freelancers. All these numbers were dramatically worse when you get outside of the U.S. and you're talking with freelancers who are not based in the U.S. When you drill down on what is part of their expectation around payments, it's not actually only about the pay me on time and pay accurately. You can see that number 2 and number 3 definitely hit that. Of course, that's kind of table stakes nowadays, and paying them on time, paying them accurately, that's expected. Really, if you add it up, the number one highest requirement or most common requirement is generally payment visibility. They feel like their communication on payment status is subpar. And so big expectation around, I want automatic notification, real-time notification if there's a payment issue, and some help on how to resolve it. I want to view my payment status online so I can see it in real time, maybe see my payment history and the such. Automatically update me on payment status. Is my payment approved? Is my payment sent? Was there an issue? Did it land? So payment visibility came up very prominently in the study, and it looks like it's actually more important than paying on time and accurately, at least at minimum as important. The other piece is payment options, and that's kind of, we talked about table stakes, but as marketplaces mature, freelancer and the freelancer economy matures, their expectations go up as well. And so now they have an expectation for pay me and multiple payment options. Different countries, different freelancers, different dollar amounts had different expectations for which payment option they prefer. And so that's becoming a much higher expectation. Pay me on my local currency for non-US freelancers. Give me an option to be paid early. If you pay me once a month or once every 60 days, give me an option at least to be paid early. I'll take a discount, or I'll provide a discount. Pay when I reach a certain amount, like a payment threshold. So some folks don't want to collect their money when it's $10 or $20. They want to wait to a certain dollar amount to collect. So it's a decent amount, and they don't have to pay any fees related to that, or they have to pay a minimum amount of fees. So these are some of these things that falls into this payment option bucket. But 2 of the 3 most prominent expectations are certainly not pay me on time, pay me accurately. It's around the experience, really. And so thinking about that almost as a customer journey. Preferences on payment methods. So this varied pretty widely. And I think the general message is offer choice, offer a range of different payment methods. Definitely PayPal is by far today the most popular method. Very close spot on. We've seen other research that indicates this is probably the fastest trending, but ACH, or otherwise known as local bank transfer or global ACH or e-check, there's numerous terms for ACH. For the folks on the call who are U.S.-based companies, you'll know of US ACH probably, but outside of the U.S., there's also a global ACH network, right? Every country has their own form of ACH. And so this was fairly consistent across U.S. companies and non-U.S. companies on ACH around the world. Global ACH as a payment method is almost now as popular with freelancers as PayPal. And certainly we've seen other data points that indicate faster trending. But certainly you want to offer both, I would say, at bare minimum. Certainly wire transfers still have their fair share of the pie here, over 25%. Very good for expensive payments and very good for fast payments. Although there's increasing data around fraud risk with that, so you have to watch that. Prepaid debit cards also show up. Paper check still somehow are 8%. That's pretty amazing to me. And other, which probably includes other forms of new payment methods, which hopefully will trend up over time, but still a fairly fair share, a small share today, was about 7%. Interesting stuff around tax ID documentation. Many folks on the phone will probably be aware of the FACTA provisions the IRS has rolled out. They've trained about 3,000 agents to comply with the FACTA provisions and make sure that the IRS is collecting all what they deem as their fair share. And so we asked marketplaces, are they, and the freelancers, are marketplaces collecting tax ID documentation? And it's a kind of a stunning amount, 41%, over 41%, only 41% are actually collecting this information. We didn't even go into when are you collecting it. Are you collecting up front on supplier onboarding? Are you collecting at the end of the year as a mad scramble? But almost 60% are not collecting tax forms from their freelancers. It's really scary, actually, that the FACTA provisions, all of the onus of compliance is on the payer nowadays. And so those companies, whoever those 60% are really exposed to a big IRS fine. So that's what the IRS is training those 3,000 agents to do. And so that was pretty shocking.
Mm-hmm.
I think those are the key findings. I'll just note one thing. I mentioned that survey, we had over 200 freelancers around the world participate. But definitely if you're currently a marketplace that's only based in the U.S., but you're thinking of going cross-border to Europe, to Canada, to Latin America, to Asia, or if you're already global, there's some extra considerations. The data touched on a few of those, but I figured I can just add a few insights there. Definitely, of course, the reason most marketplaces in their business model plan to go global at some point is just because the opportunity is huge, and it's bigger for the gig economy than it is for other types of industries because of the ability to use labor around the world and really take full advantage of the crowd. There are some considerations you need to think of as you go down this road, though. There's about 26,000 different payment rules, and so all those different payment methods we talked about during the presentation, if you mess up as you're collecting data, as you're validating data, as you're making payments on any of those 26,000 rules, you'll result in a payment error, which means not only time wasted by your own internal team, but it's a bad experience on the other end. It's going to result in a payment delay. And then finally, it's going to result in a bank penalty fee. And so it's expensive if you don't have a validation process up front to make sure that as you're collecting data from various folks in the U.S. and abroad, you're validating that data to eliminate payment errors and experience challenges with your freelancers. Definitely those payment method preferences we talked about earlier, that's exacerbated by country. Different countries have preferences for different payment methods. And then related to that, definitely payment in local currency. It's borderline offensive to insist on paying people in another country in U.S. dollar. And I think there's an emotional aspect of it, regardless of the reason why almost 70% of non-U.S. freelancers want to be paid in their local currency. It's also, of course, a added point of friction, and there's costs with the conversion and such. But the final piece is you just have to think as you go global with your freelancer base. There's numerous regulatory items you need to think about, things like OFAC and SDN lists and do not pay lists around the world for anti-money laundering. There's communication challenges you have to think about, and definitely tax compliance. Those factor provisions are pretty heavy. And then finally, there's fraud, and just thinking about fraud proactively and how do you get in front of it, because that does increase as you go global, as does payment errors and the such. So that is my section of the presentation. I don't want to take too much time because we want to get to Neal and Epi and the stars of the show to answer some questions and also answer your questions. So if you do have questions, please do fill out the Q&A, and we'll answer those, and Epi will be answering a number of other questions as well.
Great. Well, thank you very much, Rob. This is an excellent presentation. I have some observation, but I'd like to really go into ask some of the questions and maybe get this question directly to Neal. Neal, we just heard from Rob about the challenges related to the paying domestic and global freelancers in the gig economy. Let's get some observation from here. What finding from the study stood out to you the most?
Yeah.
Neal,
can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay, great. Yeah, thanks, Epi. And I was, super happy to partner with you and Rob, because I'm a research nerd. So our audience at Shareable.net, they really eat up the research and like to apply it. There are a lot of entrepreneurs in our readership. And one of the things that really stuck out to me was that over 19% of freelancers use 4 or more marketplaces. And so I really saw that as kind of, perhaps the vanguard of the future of work, and plus that a high percentage of these are from outside the United States. This is going to be a different type of worker or freelancer than someone just using one marketplace. And I think it's worth researching or doing some crosstabs on that, because the idea is if you can please the hardcore, I think you could please just about anyone. And then the other thing that really stood out for me was the fact that it was the loyalty numbers, the things that contributed to loyalty the most, and that it was the notifications that was the top item, not getting paid on time, but being notified about how things are going. And I think that and I want to connect that stat to the stat around would you quit a platform or have you quit a platform because of a payment issue. I saw that 73.7% number as kind of low, actually. I would expect it to be a lot more, and I think these two are connected, and what it has to do with, and what Rob alluded to, is the whole experience around the payment. It's about the communication and the relationship you build through that process. And in a service business, there are always going to be problems. You're always going to fail as a provider at one point or another in the relationship. And what matters is how do you handle that failure? Are you prompt? Do you take ownership of it? Do you set a deadline when it's going to be fixed? Do you meet those expectations in fixing them? And even better if you exceed the expectations in how you resolve it with your user. That's when your customer starts to talk about you and fundamentally changes the relationship, right? And then and research has shown it's not the users that have the perfect experience that are the most loyal. It's the ones that have a problem and it's addressed well that are the most loyal.
Yeah. That's really great points. I was really surprised too when and I wondered what does it feel to be part of those 4 different marketplaces for your specific skills that you're pouring out there. And also another thing that I was really surprised about, over 50% of people picking a PayPal as a preferred payment system, given the fact that PayPal is one of the most expensive in terms of the fees. So the fees are, I believe, they're quite high. So I wonder, Rob, why is that? Do you think there's a reason for it, or it's because of the PayPal has this big brand, or?
Yeah, I think it's a good question. I don't have the perfect oracle on the answer to that, but we do know from other analysis we've conducted that for payment methods under $500, PayPal is particularly popular. I think even in our own payment base, we pay out to about $4 billion a year to different payees around the world, and about half of our transactions, maybe about 40%, are PayPal. So, but when we cut back the data, it's particularly popular for sub $500 payments. And if you think about it, PayPal charge percentage model. So the bigger the dollar amount goes, the more substantial that penalty is, so to speak. And so, but for sub 500, it's not as meaningful to the freelancer, and yet it's a very effective payment experience. So I think that's one piece of it. Certainly, PayPal is particularly useful in other countries as well, and it's a popular method generally across the globe. Having said that, there's several other countries who we know just from experience with our payees and freelancers do not enjoy PayPal. So I think those are a few of the reasons. I think ACH, on the other hand, the reason that's been trending up so high is, one, it's fast, paid in a few days. It has by far the lowest fraud risk, whereas PayPal and Wire and check have high and trending up fraud risk. And it's not very expensive. So it kind of hits all the bubbles. But the tricky piece is that local ACH network, there's not like one place to get all countries on an ACH. And so you have to work with someone who can pull all those different networks together. If you're only paying U.S. freelancers, that's easy enough to work with a provider or a bank to pay with U.S. ACH. It's when you're cross-border that gets particularly challenging.
Yeah. Before I move to the next slide, I just want to remind the participants that you can ask questions here. I believe, right, Rob? They can ask questions here.
Indeed.
And so, just drop your questions here. We'll pick it up later. I'd like to go back to Neal here to one of the questions. So Neal, as the co-founder of Shareable and as one of the leading voices in sharing transformation, can you share some of your thoughts on what everyone involved in this space needs to do and also not do to ensure this movement, this space, reaches its fullest potential?
Yeah, I mean, that's a big question, and there's so many different sectors of the space, as your research has shown, and that wonderful graphic you shared with all the different sectors, and each one of those has very specific challenges. So to give any kind of answer that makes sense, I have to really, for the whole space, to go to a kind of 30,000-foot view. And one of the things that I see across the board is that often the methods of growth and the governance of these platforms are incompatible with the scale, the experience, and the impact that they hope to create, right? And I think there is, in a way, a sort of broken digital social contract, and that the move to the new internet, the blockchain, is a kind of exodus, is a kind of a vote of no confidence, right? Mm-hmm. And to just elaborate a little bit, what I mean is that if you are building a platform where people where it's kind of peer-to-peer, or like any service, it's co-created, right? And this is where the user actually contributes a lot of value, right? And that user has to be conditioned for that marketplace, has to understand like how their contribution, how their interaction is going to help create value and make that marketplace thrive, so they can continue to use it and derive value out of it. So there's a kind of cultural facet that's really important, that if you are using very transactional advertising to bring on a user with only appeals to kind of saving or earning money, you'll get a lot of users who are not going to really behave in a way that's going to build a business and create an experience that'll have a sustainable advantage, right? So, instead of using those transactional methods of building a big customer base, which, often you see that when a company gets a big cash infusion from a VC, you start to see them everywhere, Google ads and Facebook ads and so forth. And if you really want to grow in a sustainable way and maintain that culture and that experience, you've got to bring in users through your existing users and share the culture and the rules of the road with them as they come on board, right? And then also, you just because more and more as we shift from this kind of manufacturing to service-based economy, where the user, the customer is a co-creator. They are part of the formula for creating value. They're not just receiving it; they're creating it with you as a platform. That requires a new kind of deal, right? Where they have a little bit more power, a little bit more say, and maybe even some ownership in the platform. And we're seeing more and more platforms headed exactly in that direction. Blockchain is like an extreme, edge case, I think, at this point. But there are other platforms like Stocks United, where it's a stock photo marketplace where all the photographers are worker owners. They have 1,000 worker owners, and they all decide together the direction of the company and share in the surplus or the profits. So I think this is really, really important.
Yeah, I was just about to say that this is a really great example of what Stocks United has been doing that, and I think it needs to have this accountability from the founders in terms of when they're getting into these marketplaces, not treating these marketplaces just as the numbers, but also treat them as there are people there in the crowds, there's people that are really have emotions, they have feelings, and they need to be respected. And I think this is the opportunity that comes in the second wave or the second generation of these marketplaces. Now, I'd like to go back a little bit here in terms of Rob's presentation. He talked about the importance for these two-way marketplaces to attract and retain the freelancers and the sellers. And looking here in the early days of sharing economy company, should we focus in building up and sustaining the freelancer community, or more like on the demand side, or how does this going to change as the marketplace matures? Either you, Rob, or Neal, what do you think about this?
Hey, Rob, you want to chime in?
Yeah, it'll be interesting to hear what everyone's perspective here is, but I think kind of just parlaying off of what Neal was talking about, if it's all about the experience on both sides of the chain, and you get the demand side, but then the demand side's first few impressions of your service is poor, either because you don't have enough freelancers to fulfill the work, or those freelancers you have aren't particularly loyal, or you don't have quality controls in place, and then the experience for that end customer is not strong there. Once you've lost that first customer, or you've even maybe started a bad word-of-mouth chain, your marketplace is really starting to have risk exposed to it. So I think my perspective is that the first focus, even though it doesn't satisfy the VC's needs, but the first focus should be building a really thriving freelancer community that really addresses the needs and loves your service, and you've worked out all the kinks or a lot of the kinks. And of course, you can't do only one and not the other, but I think priority-wise in the early days, and even ongoing, it's that freelancer community that's the bigger area of value ultimately for the long term of your company. Certainly, you do need to get demand, but it won't be sustainable, to Neal's point, if the freelancer or the center of your product aren't addressed and really loyal and happy.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would just second that, and just think about the experience of restaurants, right? It's like you don't go into a restaurant that's empty, right? That's a kind of a social take at it, but also Say you were going to a farmer's market. What if you went to a farmer's market and there was a lot of advertising for it, come to the farmer's market, but there's no stalls and no food to buy? I mean, you got to have some supply first.
Yeah. I think having that options in terms of the product offering in a marketplace, it's a very critical part. And how can you really balance that as you grow? And I think one of the main issues here that we see with many marketplaces that the too early into the VC funding, and then you have different requirements, and those requirements, they don't really meet your vision, your thinking, and you end up really being in the midst of it. And I think that's one of the big challenges. Unless you really have a great VC or great investor that sees that as an opportunity that is not a short term, but in terms of like looking to the long term. So I covered a little about decentralization. I want to bring this question to Rob, and maybe also Neal, you can give us some of your thoughts. But so Rob, you'll be speaking at CrowdSourcing Week Global Conference this October in DC. And Tipalti is our CSW payments partner. Our theme for this year, as I mentioned, is decentralization. We'll be covering many aspects of decentralized platforms. Now, my question is, what is your take around decentralized platforms, and how does Tipalti, a company that you are head of marketing, fit in this space, given the fact that this space has grown so much and is still growing rapidly?
Yeah, no, it's absolutely the direction and the trend in the marketplace, I think, across every facet of the sharing economy. So it's definitely the direction. It's definitely what I think it was you, Epi, that talked about the trust, and decentralization goes to the core of that trust. So I think that's the one piece. Kind of where Tipalti fits in is from the beginning of our beginnings, when we talked to customers and built our products around their workflow and their needs. They had a similar type directional answer, and you saw it in some of the data today around they want diversity. Not everyone has the same preferences and choice and the such, and being dependent only on one bank or having to work with 3 banks or 3 financial institutions is just an example on the payments end. And so the system's been built agnostic to payment methods, and so right now it handles about 6 different payment methods plus over 120 different currencies as well. Over time, that'll add up. So as we see demand, as we're confident in the regulatory environment being worthy around additional payment methods, the system is made to be able to inherit additional methods over the course of time. And so what we try and focus on at our company is just focusing on our payees and our payers and what demand is coming in, as well as being aware of what's changing in the market from a trend perspective. The other thing we have to be aware of, we are a money transmitter. We're regulated in every state in the country practically, and we have annual audits. And that's because we're decentralizing our model. We're very similar to PayPal. And with that, we have a chief compliance officer in-house, and we have a number of various steps we have to take to make sure we retain those money transmitters and we serve our customers as best as possible. That allows us to control the destiny and modify with the market. But with that comes some responsibility, and I think it's worthy of saying it comes with all the responsibility of everyone in the space, particularly in the crypto space and the blockchain space, is your system, a system like Tipalti or these payment methods and the such, they all have to be socially responsible, and that means not paying anti-money launderers, not paying fraudsters, not paying potentially payments to kidnappers and various things like that. And so what we look at is we look at the demand, we look at the trends, and then the third piece you have to look at is the regulatory environment. And I think the thing that the crowd economy needs to do around decentralization, at least as it relates to financials, is make sure that there's a regulatory construct around it where you eliminate the high risk where some of these payment methods can be used for abusive reasons. And what we're doing is monitoring which method not only is going to trend, which is going to trend for the right types of businesses, because part of our responsibility is protecting the CFO, the board, the controller, and the participants in the company, not only deliver a great payment experience and help the company scale and grow and add efficiencies and be able to allocate resources towards talent and innovation, but the third piece is protect them from fraud risk and tax and regulatory risk and the such. And so that's the fourth piece, and I think until that matures, it's going to hold back the progress of some of these businesses.
Yeah.
And certainly that's when we'll start adopting it as one of the additional payment methods, really.
Nice. And Neal, you want to have any take on this?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, just real quick, I just think that there's some really powerful drivers for decentralization. First there's this sort of moral dimension and this sort of where, we live in this, where the gulf between the rich and the poor widening, this wealth inequality. And if you're a business and you're not aware of this, you're not sensitive to this, you're going to seem tone deaf, right? And so you need to address that and just treat your stakeholders well. There's also just the new technology and business models that are low cost, easy to enter and use. So that's driving things. And then there's also just you get a competitive advantage as a business by decentralizing. If you do it right. One great example is Moto Car Co-op, which is like a decentralized car sharing organization in Vancouver, British Columbia, and they have like an A+ Better Business Bureau rating, and their their largest competitor is Zipcar, and Zipcar is the old fleet model, corporate owned. I think Avis bought it. Their Better Business Bureau rating, I think, is something like a D or an F, and that's because in the Moto Car Co-op case, the users are the owners of the company, and the service level requires people to return the car on time, clean with gas, and return to the right place. And so if you're an owner of a business, you're going to do that. You're going to play by the rules, and you're going to help make the service run better and have a higher service level quality, right? So there is this big competitive advantage also that you get with decentralization that you really have to pay attention to.
Yeah. Well, I think we are right on time to wrap this up. Do you see any questions here from participants? Anyone has any questions?
There is one question around the decentralized platform, so I think we've addressed it actually through that conversation. I think the one thing I'll just add is what Neal actually brought up. A form of the decentralized platform is these review sites that have popped up these days all over Google and Bing and the such. And so they're in this economy, but the other piece is the importance of them in this decentralized space, and that the first thing people do nowadays, whether you're buying a service or you're going to use a marketplace or any type of service, you go to Google often and you search for reviews with that company's brand. And so those folks who, similar to Neal's example where they failed and they didn't either manage that properly or they got negative reviews, they're not going to survive long term. And the ones who make freelancers as well as their customers happy and ideally turn them into advocates, they're going to be the ones with 4 or 5 stars, and those are just going to take off. So, as you're reviewing any vendor or looking for any service or thinking about your own company, you really have to have that top of mind nowadays because it's so powerful to, the success of your business.
Yeah, and I'll just Robert, just add 15 seconds on this is, one model that we see emerging that's really promising is a kind of co-op meets franchise model, where you get the best of both worlds. You get local control with scalability, and there's a tool or a lending library in Vancouver that's doing exactly that model called the Thingery. And so, I think that's the beginning of something or an example of something that I think is really promising.
Very interesting. Great. Well, this is it. Great presentation. Thank you very much, Neal, for joining us. Thank you very much, Rob, for making this happen. And this was really informative. And maybe we can follow up on this on a blog or something. So we'll figure that out and bring this to the next stage.
Thanks, Epi, for your presentation. It was great, as always, in the conversation.
Yeah, thank you, everyone.
Thanks, Neal.
Take care, everyone.
My pleasure.